This is Kelly.
And this is Amy.
And you're listening to Diary of a Death Investigator. We are on episode 43, and we're calling it When Lightning Strikes Twice. We had a hard time coming up with this episode name just because we're not trying to pass judgment.
I have my own thoughts about this case, just my own opinions.
We did a little bit of research just so that we could give some context of what happened before and after this case. It was just, this case is just really, 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 really sad.
And I've worked so many of these cases just to give people a heads up. It's concerning a child death. And so I've worked so many children deaths that it's hard for me not to be kind of jaded about these. So you automatically jump to the first conclusion when all signs point to one person. So, because typically that is usually the case in these circumstances. So,
well, I'll give more detail after you start.
Well, so I have to say that in this case, I didn't have this call come in until like early morning hours. And when I say early morning hours, it was almost 3:00 in the morning when I got this call, and it came in from the hospital, and it was a children's hospital, and it is a trauma center. And so they deal with, of course, anything that is like blunt-force traumas and bad burns. And so they had said that they had this 2-year-old that had come in with very severe thermal burns and smoke inhalation that had passed away about an hour earlier. And at that point, my scene was going to be actually the hospital instead of actually going to the house. At this time, the scene was done. There wasn't anything there. And usually it depends on the circumstances as far as what the case is. I think I've talked about this before, what I go to the hospital for as far as for cases. And I don't always go to the hospital for cases, and children deaths are the exception to the rule, because a lot of times, I mean, you're not going to be getting evidence from a person from the hospital. And so it's basically because this was a suspicious circumstance. And a lot of times we have organ share networks that are wanting to get tissue off of children as well. So organs and tissue. And a lot of times that's just because they're in high demand for children who are in dire need of these things, obviously. So I already am trying to get like 2 steps ahead of the organ share network and get these things from the hospital that I know that our doctors are going to be requesting, and getting pictures of these children and getting records and documents from doctors there, and anything that's going to be blood work and those types of things. So all these circumstances of these things are really important for me to go. And I learned that the officers and detectives were actually at the hospital as well. And so I thought that was also kind of weird, because typically in something that is concerning something suspicious, it's not always that they're waiting at the hospital. They might be working the case as suspicious, but they don't always show up to the hospital. Children's deaths, they will show up to see us examine the body at the hospital, and then they'll get our take on that as well. But in this instance, it wasn't like something where it was something that they believed the child had been, I guess, mistreated by the parents, or like a sexual assault thing. And so this was something that could have been like accidental or something to that effect. So when I get to the hospital, there's a couple of detectives there, and it's kind of a weird case, they preface this that this is one of two children that were being hospitalized. However, the second child had actually been metaflighted to another state that was nearby to their hospital and was being treated. I think that he had more severe burns, and so he was being taken to that hospital. So this child was already obviously pronounced dead. That's why I was there. And he was obviously covered in burns. They usually tell you, like doctors will tell you, what percentage of burns are covering the body. And I believe that he was covered in like 90%, like burns. So it's not necessarily that the burns were like terribly bad. I would say like first to second degree burns to majority. But the main thing for him was that he had smoke inhalation. And so the thing that we can do to kind of determine that when we're just doing an external view is we look for black soot around the nostrils, and then we'll actually open up their airway in their mouth. Again, that's if they're not intubated, you can check their airway. So you can look for soot like on the tongue and the back of the airway, like into the throat as well. And a lot of times they'll have like that cherry red lividity from the
gases.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. I listen.
Yes. So from the carbon monoxide poisoning. So because again, that replaces the oxygen in the red blood cells. So those are like good indicators that you can look at for, things from like a fire other than just burns. That's what we would look for there. I didn't see any other trauma on him. And so of course, their story is this child was staying the weekend with the grandparents, and there was a fire that started, and the grandparents couldn't get the kids out of the house. Apparently, the one grandkid, the older one, had woken them up. I think he was stated to have been yelling, but they were in different bedrooms from them and they couldn't get to them in time. So the grandpa got out of the house, but he's older, obviously. He struggled to get out alive himself. So that's what we know. And so I remember asking the police, like, well, why do we think this is suspicious? Do we think that the grandparents did this? And they're like, well, no, but the grandpa's son, who is the father of these two children, a few years prior, they called this woman his wife, and his other son also died in a fire.
Okay, so let's back up for a second, because when we Googled it, because we were like convinced this guy was guilty, it had only been like 2 years prior. It wasn't a few. It was like 2, because at the time, the sons were 2 and 3 when this house fire broke out. But the previous fire, the sons were like 8 months old and like 2 years old. Maybe a little over 1. Anyways, there wasn't a huge difference in age. So like it just happened like 2 years before.
Yes. And then the other kid, it said was 4, the kid that died then.
So there was just to talk about Amy's talking about. So when I looked it up, there was a house fire, an apartment fire, where the fiance was in the house with 3 children. 2 of the boys were the ones that we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. But then there was an older boy that was 4 years old. And so the mom was able to save the 2 younger ones. And then she went back in to get the other one, and she didn't make it out. And she ended up passing away, as did the 4-year-old son.
Right.
Yes.
And then we learned that he's a stepson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And both of these times, this dad was not home.
Yes.
However, I think I know where he works, and I think he works nights, just by the way. That just actually dawned on me.
Well, like we said, we went back and we looked at, the story again because, to me, I'm super suspicious of this because, how does he make it out of this? And obviously the cops think that this is suspicious. 2 house fires within 2 years. Well, not even 2 years of each other. And not only does this guy's wife or fiance die, but all 3 of the kids die. And he comes out of this unscathed. And I think that's weird. So we're looking at, stories of interviews about this because I never actually get to talk to the grandpa to kind of get his story, which to me, that is kind of tantamount of investigations personally, because I can get a secondhand story from a cop, but really to them, they're writing down what they think is most important, which I might pick out things of a story that I think are more important than what they think is.
And we mentioned that in the last episode, details, right? Not
Yes.
everybody thinks details are super important.
Mm-hmm. And I typically try to write everything and put everyone's stories together in a way that coincide with each other, because sometimes you're going to have some overlapping things. But like I said, you're not going to have someone like, oh, well, they said that the screen door was left open so that they could let air in, so that helped fuel the fire. Okay, well, that is really important. So they left that part in, but like the grandpa said that they had a smoke detector and it did go off, but then the fire marshal went in and they said they couldn't find one. Okay, well, I don't know how many people have actually been into really bad fires after. The point of firefighters, when they go in, they're there to save people and I think the overall structural integrity of the home. So sometimes it's a total loss. And I think that home was, because I think when you look for that address, I think it's just an empty lot now. And when you go through a home, when it is just completely totaled, it's damp still and it's still smoking and everything is just a jumbled mess and you don't know what's on top of each other. Things are melted to each other. And I think everyone knows what a smoke detector looks like. It's plastic and doesn't take a high specific temperature to melt plastic. It's chemistry and physics. So plastic melts very easily, and fire of that intensity can melt that really easy. So they probably didn't even see that among all the rubble. And when they're raking through stuff, it looks like junk to everybody because it's wet and it's burnt. So they probably either didn't see it or it probably was burned. So I know that the fire marshal in this case stated that they didn't actually find a cause to the fire. I think they put it as undetermined, which I know in a lot of these fire cases that is a big determination on how an agency steers the direction of their investigation. So I know a lot of times what you're really looking for is an accelerant, right? Or you're looking at your plugs and you can see if something sparked there. Or if someone has a cigarette that catches your curtains on fire, you're going to obviously see flames that started fire on a wall. So there are things that can be very obvious to the eye of what you can see, or sometimes what you can smell. Sometimes you can smell chemicals that have been poured as an accelerant. But
when we were kids, we had a garage fire Yeah, I remember it. I mean, we weren't there at the time. I think we went to the grocery store, but it was the central vac that caught on fire.
Mm-hmm. And I even remember that. And I was little, because that was so traumatic to me. My Barbie Jeep
Melted.
melted. I was like, not my Barbie Jeep. So,
Well, and I think even then, I think like I have a little bit of OCD. Well, Amy will tell you I have a lot of OCD. I think part of that is from when we were kids in the fire. So I unplug everything. I'm always really nervous about things catching on fire. I don't know if it's for that reason or it's just, I don't want to say it's weird having OCD because I'm sure a lot of people have it, but.
Well, yeah, traumatic events basically imprint on you and condition you right into what you do as a person. I mean, literally, I think you have those things and you're like, I don't want that to happen again because that's another traumatic experience. So yeah, I think that's very true as to sometimes the way that people are. So.
But okay, so let's talk about lightning striking twice because Mama Mia actually had a house fire when she was a kid.
And why is that? Oh, this is 2 weeks in a row we're picking on her.
I think she left a candle burning. So I think.
Oh, and you know what? I've done that before. And I was like, oh.
So I'm not saying like things can't happen. I just think that, and this is how easy fires can start, right? I mean, two of these things were, just accidents, one being caused by a person, one being caused by tech issues. But like in this case, they didn't find, I think, in either of the fires, the one with the fiance in it and the kids, I don't think they ever found a cause at either one of them.
No.
They were very specific to those places, right? Like the woman lived in an apartment complex and her place was the only place that was burned. The grandpa said, didn't he say like there were cars that had been damaged?
Well, he is claiming that it's arson, right? Because he was like, I know that I had this smoke detector. And then they said that there were 3 cars that night that were parked on the lot that had all 4 tires punctured and then a brick thrown through the back of one of the windshields that he knew happened within a specific time. And I know you asked, well, how did he know that? So I don't know if he had heard it like happen, but who knows? I don't know. He wasn't specific in stating how he knew this happened. But I mean, I think if someone's tampering with your vehicles on your lot,
chances are they're doing something to your house.
Yeah. So who knows if there were prior threats or, maybe someone was after the son, and I don't know. But that's just speculation on my end. But I personally, I don't know how the dad is not around for both of these things. And it just seems like it's just very
convenient.
Coincidental. Yeah. Well, that. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. We were sure that we remember my sleuthing skills, right? People like I looked
for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, we spent hours and hours, but I did find court records and they were just traffic things, right? So it was like no speeding, no seatbelt, documentation. It wasn't anything crazy. I mean, I don't know if he still works for the same place, but he did have a fairly decent job.
Mm.
If he didn't do, it's really sad no matter what, because then the other boy ended up dying. We found out as well. You didn't know that until we looked it up. And that was just, obviously it's just horrible. It's really, really horrible.
And then it's just deemed as an accident, as manner of death. So, yeah, and then the grandparents feel terrible because they're just like, we couldn't do anything to save them. And for those kids to live through, of course, they were probably too young the first time to remember that, but to live through that twice.
Yeah.
Or go through that twice. I mean, how scary for them.
Yeah. These are...
Well, you think it's not supposed to happen to kids, but that's kind of the unfair part of life. You know, you always hear people say, oh, why did it have to happen to this person? They were such a great person. You know, it's always that nice person that always gets like the worst kind of cancer or something. And, you know, that's just kind of the thing. It's, you know, you hear about the 16-year-old kid that dies in a car accident right before graduation, or, you know, it's that kind of stuff. And that's the crappy part about your job, that you have to show up to those things, and you just kind of look at the parents and you're just like, what am I going to say to them? And what gets you even more is when the parents are just the nicest people, and they're just like, we appreciate you so much for what you do. Like, we can't believe that there's people like you that do this job. And they're like, you're such a great like person for doing this. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, you're grieving right now and you're like telling me what like what an amazing person I am. And I'm just like, wow, like, what did you do to deserve this? Like, ugh. So I guess in a way, that's why you want to do that job too, is for like people like that. So,
Well, and for this, and for kids, like in this case, if you had found something that you could have helped maybe put someone in jail or had a different outcome.
you know, and I think of like the O.J. Simpson. It's like, you know, after he passed away and you find out that his kids all had to sign like NDAs and stuff. And they're like, oh, did he have like a deathbed confession? And it's like, well, I guess we'll never know.
Wait, what? His kids had to sign an NDA?
Yeah. Like everyone that was there when he like passed, like they all had to sign.
Why does it matter if he's dead? Legacy?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like his legacy ended a long time ago. That wasn't, and for those kids, if they're, you know, that makes me so mad.
He wrote the book. If I would have done it, this is how. Like,
no, he did not.
Yes. Yes. Kelly, how do you not know this? Come on.
I think because I remember O.J. Simpson's case, and now we're totally off topic, but I remember O.J. Simpson. I was in like 7th or 8th grade. I mean, we were watching it in school because it was like,
Bronco.
Yeah. I remember, we watched it and I was just like, what is going on? It was crazy. There's only a few cases that I've watched in my lifetime. I'm going to tell you though, the case I am going to be glued to YouTube, whatever the criminal channel is. Which one?
The Colorado or
Idaho.
Idaho, yeah.
The Idaho guy.
Because you're like telling me about it.
I just can't believe that one individual killed 4 people in 10 minutes. That was the amount of time it took, and that no one heard and I being super nosy, and this may end up being a Patreon thing we do because I don't know that I want to share my opinion with everybody because it may not be a popular opinion. So I think our listeners, at least we hope that you appreciate our opinion. Not that it matters, but like Amy actually has some really good points that I
can tell you from what I've seen and what I've studied, and there's some real crazy people out there. And I think that the crazy people now are just coming out of the woodworks because they're like, oh, I can be famous for being a freak. And I think it's like, and they don't even care if they're like renowned for that.
It will just be really interesting, this case, when there's so many things that are going on. So yeah, that might be something where we keep it.
There's a lot that they haven't released because obviously the police can't, well, in the prosecution, they can't release because obviously they don't want the defense getting a hold of that stuff. But there's a lot in evidence. Obviously we know there's text messages and all that stuff, but there's going to be a lot that's going to be very telling about what happened during the time there and the people that survived. I mean, obviously, no one blames those survivors for
No,
that,
but I
so.
asked you a few questions about that and your responses were really interesting. So if that's something that you guys think you're going to be interested in, like I said, I don't know that I want to air that while it's going on with the parents and stuff, but it might be something that we do in private. So if that's something that you guys are interested in hearing about, or you're as interested as we are and you have questions too, you can.
Kelly is.
I have my own input because as soon as it happened,
You were texting me.
I was, but I remember I was at Disneyland. I was at Disneyland when it happened, and I started looking up these people on Instagram. And at the time, some of their Instagrams were open, and the house was, you can easily find a house these days. And so I found the house and I was like, oh, I can see the layout of the house. I can see it. Like, I understand kind of what would have happened. And it's just like, oh man, it's just, and it's so sad. And now the house is gone, which is even crazier.
I think that was a mistake.
But obviously our opinion doesn't matter because we're not there. I
think mine does, honestly, but who am I?
I just
That's
mean
one secret I'll never tell.
I just don't want to like, parents are already grieving and people already have, everyone has an opinion on this case.
I know.
So I just don't know that that's something that's appropriate to just put out in the public. So anyway, if you do have questions or you do think that's going to be interesting, the case is going to happen this summer. You can email us questions at kelly@diaryofadeathinvestigator.com, or you can message us on our Instagram page. It doesn't have to necessarily be about that case. It can be about any future cases that you would like to ask Amy. And maybe we'll be giving you some good news pretty soon. Don't know. We're putting
it into the universe.
Put some good energy out in the universe for Amy right now. That's all we'll say for now. And until next time.
Bye.